Okay, we are.
Yeah.
Okay, welcome everybody to the October meeting of Co-ordinating Overview and Scrutiny. My first task is to remind everybody that this is being recorded and webcast on our YouTube site, and that you can record and take photographs unless there are confidential or exempt items. I don't think there are any, so you can record it all if you so desire. Apologies, I've got Councillor Mohammed Akhlaq, Liz Clements and Penny Holbrook. I haven't got, these aren't apologies, but just to welcome Dan King, who's a graduate trainee, who's sitting on Emma's left, who's here for 6 months, shadowing Scrutiny and to learn how we do it in Birmingham. Yeah. And also Christian Skay, who is sitting at the back. He's a Londoner, by the way, but I did say that we won't hold that against him.
Some of us might like it.
Yes, well. Emma is leaving, as you know. In fact, this is her last meeting, so going to formal county council, as you know, and Christian has been appointed on an interim basis to take over pending a permanent appointment, because it's such a critical position, we couldn't wait for the recruitment process. So welcome, Christian, and we look forward to working with you for, I don't know how long, but in the coming months, certainly. Welcome, everybody. Appointments from full council committee members. As you know, we had 2 changes of committee chairs, and they're both here today. So welcome, Councillor Mick Brown and Councillor Simon Suleiman. This is your first thing. So we're here at the board. Secondly, remind you, must declare all relevant pecuniary and non-pecuniary interests arising from any business to be discussed at this meeting. And if you do declare such an interest, you can't speak or take part in that agenda item. And any declarations will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. And I've got a note from Councillor Cooner, who emailed me. She's here now.
Yes.
Hello. Welcome. I didn't see you creep in. I was in the middle of speaking. Following on from a register of interest training session delivered by Suzanne Dodd, Councillor Cooner says that family members and close friends have exempt properties, and therefore she won't be taking part in any future discussions concerning our scrutiny, investigation and recommendation. So thank you for that. Action notes, can we confirm the meeting of the 10th of September, they are true and accurate? Has anybody got anything that they have issue with in those? No? Thank you. Well, we come on to the main part of the meeting, which is an update from the Deputy Leader, Councillor Bridget Jones, on customer services, digital inclusion and performance framework. And she's brought a phalanx of officers with her to it's a Greek term, did you know that?
I did not know that.
It's supposedly a battle formation, so I hope that you don't see us as your enemy. We are your partners in this, and welcome over to you.
I knew you'd like to ask me something in common.
Thank you, Chair. And first of all, it's really lovely to be in front of you all in real life for the first time in a very, very long time. So as you said, Chair, I've got 3 things to bring to you today. I don't know how you want to take these. We're thinking we would do the customer services item and then take questions, and then do the broadband item and questions and performance item. That's
yes,
agreeable. Lovely. So on the customer services front, first of all, we've got some slides to present to you. I think have been circulated in advance, which myself and Wendy will double act on to talk you through it. The gist of this is it came out of some fantastic work that Scrutiny did a couple of years back, looking at our customer services journey and the fact that a lot of what we were doing wasn't good enough for our residents. And challenging us to learn from our mistakes and to put things right. A new system has come into place to deal with that. We've had some teething issues with it, which we will talk through. But just want to say thank you to everybody for your feedback on that system. It was all thought to turn it into something better. But we're now at this exciting stage where we're starting to get stuff out of the system as well. We're starting to see some of the benefits of a centralised way of dealing with customer complaints and inquiries, and starting to be able to do the exact thing that Scrutiny tasked us with doing in the first place, which is learning from our mistakes and putting them right so citizens get a better experience next time. We're looking to Wendy, so you've got the slides up in front of you. We're going to do a double act on this, if that's okay. So I'll pass over to Wendy to lead through some of the operational aspects of this.
Okay, so I think the slides will come up. It's just a bit late on my laptop. Hopefully everybody's got a copy that they can see. So as Councillor Jones alluded to, obviously the work that we did with overview scrutiny a couple of years ago now around the top 5 complaint areas of the council. And some of the key challenges were about visibility of reporting. So we know at that point we had at least 3 separate complaint systems that were being used. Sometimes complaints were not, or complaints and inquiries were not actually being captured in any of those systems. So the key challenge for this organisation is that we didn't have visibility over the sheer scale of complaints and inquiries that were being processed, because quite often that went straight into services. Sometimes it was recorded, sometimes it wasn't, and that didn't give us a really good understanding. So depending on which day of the week and which version of the truth, any system produced a figure for you in terms of how many complaints do we get about particular activity. You have 3 versions of the truth. So a big push to actually get that into one of the 3 systems. So this is not a new system, but it's a system that we decided was best out of the 3 systems that we had operating across the council. And we did a lot of engagement on the back of the ONS report. So we had 3 sort of very clear tasks that we were set, which was about understanding the current performance, not just for the contact that comes through the contact centre, but for council inquiries that are going directly into service areas and more widely through council inquiries or directly. Explore service delivery in 3 areas to look at root causes. So we absolutely knew and accepted that we get lots of repeat complaints and frustration, not just from members, but from also customers, that we get the same complaints over and over again. And actually, what do we do to learn from those complaints, and how do we build a mechanism and process for doing that? And then also, we didn't have a very clear protocol. So how do we make sure that officers respond to members' complaints, members' inquiries, and arguably, we shouldn't need a protocol to say this is the way that we would communicate with each other in terms of responding to this activity. But we felt because of the state of play at that point, we needed to absolutely develop a protocol which we've now got, and we've launched, and we've done that collaboratively with everybody. So there's 4 recommendations, recommendation 4, 6, 7 and 10, all of which have been progressed. The members' protocol was drafted and presented to the committee on the 13th of April and implemented on the 24th of May. We've now got a clear escalation route as part of our complaints and inquiry handling process, and we have a single system which we progress activity through. Have to caveat that with if people use it and if people use the inboxes. What we can't account for is if people choose to still direct stuff to services, then we won't have visibility over it. And the complaints teams, we resourced up to what we expected to be a 10% increase in the number of complaints and inquiries once we've got visibility through a single system. And actually what we can report that when we got to the end of July reporting, there was actually a 28% increase in the sheer volume of activity. So we know that there was at least a 20% increase in the volumes that were coming through over the expected 10% that we had resourced for. We did invest over £1 million, so we didn't put new teams in. We had existing complaints teams. Some were in directorates, some were in a central team, and some sat within a business support function. What we did is brought all of that resource together and embedded it as part of a directorate. Now, that hasn't worked as well as we'd hoped on the basis that we've had the pandemic. So the big principle behind that was co-locating teams, so that the complaints teams were embedded with the operational areas. So, for example, for our housing service, we planned for that one to be at Woodcock Street. Obviously, with remote working at the moment, we've not been able to do that as fully as we would hope. But the complaints teams are a directorate resource and they work alongside those areas. So that's a little bit about the how and why we were doing what we were doing. So I just want to share with you before we get into the detail about the volumes. Post-launch, and we're now just coming up to the end of the 5th month into recruiting an additional 29 staff that have gone in to support the increase. Additional resources. Obviously, we, as I said, 10% increase is expected. We've had 30. We are now really starting to get some good quality reports coming through in terms of where the issues are. Now, many councillors, when we speak to councillors and members of the public, will say, well, none of this was a surprise to us. We could have told you that without the reports coming through, and that's probably a very, very true position. But what having the data in one place gives us is the facts and figures to be able to have an escalated conversation based on fact about the reality of what's happening in some of these localities and areas.
And that's a really key point to labour on this. So that 28% uplift in official complaints, huge amount of that was already in the system. It was stuff that was sat in directors' inboxes. It was things that were sat in assistant directors' inboxes. It was things that, in the case of maybe the waste service, were sat in individual depots' inboxes. Previously, those complaints we think were still existing, but they were just scattered throughout the council because people were sending them to individuals that they knew would work on them. Officially, the number of complaints in some areas skyrocketed, whereas previously those complaints were in the system, but they weren't official complaints, and we didn't know that they were there. What we've got now is the ability to actually recognise where there are issues and to go in and to make that difference. And that ongoing frustration from members where often we've known that there's an issue, we've been able to tell you that an area is underperforming, but officially it's doing fine. That shouldn't happen anymore. What we know to be true and what we know to be landing in our inboxes should now also be flagging up on the complaint system. That is the big difference. And that's the thing that gives us the lever to make change. I'll pass back to Wendy to talk about an early example of that.
Thank you. So one of the areas which we thought would be helpful just to understand how we arrived at this. Within the complaint system, we have a category called failure to do something. And by having the complaints recorded in a single place, we would get an increase in volume of complaints, which would call, well, the root cause was a failure to do something. And what we identified by analysing those complaints, working with the service areas, talking to the teams in housing, there was a staff shortage, quite a considerable staff shortage around the processing of housing applications. And so we were getting lots of complaints from people about not being able to access or bid for properties, or they were bidding for properties, but they were not getting selected. People that were in temporary accommodation or other types of accommodation. Lots of frustration around not being bidding, but not actually getting anywhere. And we identified a backlog in actually turning around the housing applications. And so we worked with the service area to get underneath the skin of that, to say, how are we going to progress these applications? We cannot leave them in the system. At that point, we had over 14,000 that were waiting in the system somewhere or in an in-tray to be processed. And actually, by working with customer services, we deployed 18 of the contact centre staff that support housing activity. And over the last 6 weeks, they've cleared 5,000 of those applications so that they're no longer in the system, which will considerably reduce the complaints that we get about that activity. And that's the benefit of the system. So we committed that by December, we will support the service area with clearing that backlog. So it wasn't about taking the information, going into the service and hitting them with a stick for why has this gone wrong, what's happening. It's about understanding why we can't progress it, what's happening, what support do you need to move the recruitment along to get the right people with the right skills to progress this work, so that we can, on average, we will start to see if we don't get complaints about that and they continue to maintain a position of no backlog, we should reduce complaints by over 300 a month in terms of people not being able to access due to delays in progressing applications. And so front and centre of this, caveated all with, of course, we can still do better in terms of the process and the timescale for getting back to people. We really don't want to lose sight of why we're doing it, and it is that root cause analysis that's going to make a real difference to our customers. So post-launch, we haven't just pressed the big button, so to speak, and then said, okay, everything's fine, we've got a new system. The system was always there, so it's not fundamentally different. What we have done is resourced in a different way, and we've also made sure that we've continued to engage customers. We've had a number of citizen feedback sessions, we've had a number of, so we contacted customers that had complained using the previous process to say, what was your experience this time? We had some really good feedback about clarity of process, clarity and ease in use of the system, and the quality of the response that had come back actually answered the question. That's the good side of the feedback. We equally had feedback that said it's still a little bit delayed, we want faster responses, and actually in some cases the quality of response wasn't where it needed to be. So we have to continue to feed this back into our complaints teams, continue that training programme. All the feedback that we get goes into a monthly briefing to each of the teams to make sure that we're learning where we're not getting it right and where we're still not doing what we need to. We did identify an issue with the processing of inquiries, and so you'll see in the presentation, I've separated out complaints and inquiry handling so that we can give you the statistics on both pieces, because I think it's really important to understand the difference between complaints and where we're getting first contact and the delays in responses, because the process is slightly different. We have lots of feedback from full council, which we've acted on. I won't go through the detail, but it's in the pack for you to see that where we are getting responses, for example, the automatic response, when we launched the programme, talked a lot about service level agreement. People didn't want to hear that. They just wanted to know that we've received it, we deal with it, and we get back to people. So we stripped it back just to make sure that that was lean. So if we look at page 8 of the presentation, we start to look at the complaint volumes and types. And what you can see there is that we've done this over a 3-year comparable period. So April to July 2019, 7,254 complaints. Last year, we had 3,615. For April to July this year, we had 5,928. So the positive news is that we've got less complaints than we had in 2019. We had a lot more than we had in 2020, but we all know through the pandemic that lots of services were closed and people's minds were not really necessarily on service provision. They were focused on the pandemic in the main. So we still had complaints for services that were being delivered. However, the volumes were not as high. But what slide 9 shows you is how we are doing in terms of performance of progressing complaints. So 2019, our service level at stage 1, and the important thing to note at stage 1, this is the change in the process that we agreed with Scrutiny. The complaint comes in, complaints teams will pick the phone up and speak to people about what is happening in terms of that complaint, not just take the email and assume that that is the root cause of the issue. Pick the phone up and resolve the complaint at stage 1 where possible. We are now performing 5 months in. We're turning around complaints within 15 days at stage 1 of 82.65, which is a good performance. It's not as good as last year, but we have less than half the volume. But we're doing better when we had higher volumes in 2019. So the important point to note there is that we're closing things down much more quickly at stage 1, we're getting to the resolution than we've ever done in previous years. However, our target is 90% and we haven't reached that. Our performance at stage 2, we're getting fewer complaints in at stage 2, but we've dropped in terms of resolving those issues. And that's where they're slightly more complex. We need service area involvement to get to the root cause of the issue. And we still have to drive that up. So we're working on that with the services about how we can do that. In terms of complaints, the top 3 areas, similar to what we saw in 2019 when we did this at ONS, 774 complaints for housing repairs, 400 for mixed refuse collection, and 285 for council tax. And we expect that when we do Q2 reporting, which closes on the 21st of this month, we will see a shift in that because we are starting to see an increase in other areas like education and skills. But on average, we close about 78.5% of the casework that's received each week, which equates to about 461 cases, and we average about 21% open cases. Slide 11 just gives you a breakdown by service, and it's really important to see the variations. So you will see there There's city housing, city operations and inclusive growth, the top three in terms of volume. They had a majority of the complaints that came in that April to July period. 2,913 for city housing, 2,834 for city ops, and 1,233 for inclusive growth. Much lower volumes in adult social care, corporate leadership team, educational skills and customer services. We have to caveat this, that there is still potentially in education and skills complaints that are not coming through the system, and we have to get a handle on that quickly. We've been picking that up in the service area. The portfolio leaders identified that potentially they're getting more contact than is showing in the figures. And so the good news is they're starting to identify trends where there's potential gaps and we need to resolve those. Adult social care complaints are generally more complex and take on average up to 8 hours to resolve in terms of complexity compared to the other areas. But we are looking at the resource profile across the piece and moving resources where we need to make sure that we can respond within those service levels. Slide 12 starts to talk about the inquiry volumes, and you'll see that in April, very little, because we launched really on the 26th of May for the inquiry element of the complaints handling process. So in May, we had 346, June and July, you'll see that that is a noticeable increase. Now, that isn't necessarily an increase in volume, because we didn't have a recorded number previously, because they were not captured in any system or process. And so really, the value of this is that it gives us visibility of the scale of inquiries that are coming through. So of the 1,912 cases that are coming through the inquiry route, not complaint route, the SLA percentage is only 57% of them have been closed within 10 days, which is a really low number. So we have to work with the services to get that pace and get the speed up, because although the complaints teams are recording this through the single system, they go directly into the service area systems to provide the response. And so we are looking at, do we need to provide a similar process that we do for complaints? And once we've got embedded teams that are co-located, it may be that some of that inquiry handling resource that sits within directorates, if it was located with the complaints teams, we should be able to make a little bit of improvement in the inquiry handling process. But what you can see is that for the first time we're able to report against the number of inquiries. I think the important point to note, majority of those inquiries were first contacts with the council. So they were reports of street lights being out, potholes, missed collections, which many of those activities, if they had come through directly into sort of room account and we could automate some of that process, we would be able to get a much quicker response, because when we send things through to an email, they have to be lifted out of an email inbox, input into a system, and then they're sent to an officer to respond. Whereas to do the Brum account, you use the Brum account online as a customer of the city, record your activity, that would go straight into the service area system. So within 24 hours, they could get a response back. And I think that's a really important point to note about the volume of inquiries that are coming through.
I just wanted to reiterate that one, because it is a really key one. So when you send an email, it is what smart people like Peter tell me is called unstructured data. It is essentially prose that has to be read by a human being and understood to pick out where the issues are. When you fill in the form, it is structured data, and you enter into specific areas where the issue is, what the issue is, where it is. A machine can very often process that and save an awful lot of time and money, and mean that we can put the human resource onto where it's really needed, which is some of your complex, for example, your complex adult social care cases, which can take up to 8 hours of unravelling. So it's just a really key point to draw out, because the way that we direct people to send us their complaints and inquiries, if we can get more people going down that more automated route and down the sort of self-reporting route, we can free up a huge amount of extra resource to then put into the more complex things. And that's something with our customer services strategy we'll be working on. I'll caveat that with saying, obviously, not everyone can use a computer, not everyone can use a floor. There will always be people that can't, and we have to have avenues available for them. But if we can divert the bulk that can do it that way down that route, we can free up an awful lot of space and time to do really work on quality issues. That's another thing to come out of this process. Just got visibility, all the stuff that's not coming through the website. We need to improve the website to make sure people can do that. I'll pass back to Wendy.
Thank you. Okay, so a couple more slides left at once. So we've got on slide 14 and 15, we've got the first sample data set that as members you will be able to access at the end of Q2. Q2 closes in 21 days after the reporting period, just so that we can close all of the casework down that's needed. So from the 21st of October, we'll be able to produce the reports, and members will be able to access complaint information at a service level, at a ward level, and by date. So you can click on a month, you can click on a directorate, you can click on service, or you can click on a ward to access that base level of information to show you how many complaints have we received, how many have been responded within service level, how many are outside of service level. But more importantly than that, it gives you some root cause analysis in terms of understanding what are the top 3 areas of complaint for you at a ward level and what are the root causes for that activity. As you will see on slide 16, you can then really start to drill down and understand, and it will probably just validate what you already know, because you are in your wards and you hear and you've got constituents that are coming to you day in, day out with this stuff. What this gives you is a data set to back up what people are telling you, so that when we approach services with the facts, we can then insist that there's action taken in terms of the volumes that we're getting in any particular area. So why do I talk about root cause a lot? The reason this is important is because I really don't want us to lose sight of the value of this. So we talked earlier about the housing element, but actually we've also seen other examples. We had an increase in root causes for missed assisted collections, and we have over 4,000 assisted collections per week. And on average, the complaints teams were receiving around 140 complaints that assisted collections were missed. Probably some of the most important waste collections that we do. This is people that can't pull the bins out themselves, they need support, and also can't take the bin back in. When we've looked at this, and we've looked at this at a depot level with the operational managers, with the administrative teams that support that area, we identified that the crews with the best will in the world would be printed a list of A to Z, 4,000 A to Z collections that basically tell them who requires an assisted collection. So most of the complaints come when a crew member is poorly, on leave, or absent for another reason. And so if a temporary member of staff comes on, that temporary member of staff is handed a manual sheet of paper that's got 4,000 assisted collection names on, and they're expected to work through that before they go out and start their journey, to actually work through how do we identify who needs an assisted collection on the grounds that I'm working on today. Now that is really archaic practice, and we need to automate that. So as Councillor Jones alluded to, it's not just about complaints. We are about to launch a wider customer access strategy, and a lot of that is around looking at the data that the complaints information gives us and saying, how do we improve the processes? You will have heard the waste teams talk about slabbing the cab, and that requires systems to build a database to be able to go directly to the vehicles, and you can flag at that point what and which site is an assisted collection. So regardless of whether it's a regular driver or a temporary driver, the information will be accurate, real time, and the crew will be able to not miss those assisted collections because they'll be clearly marked up. So the administrative teams that I'm providing to the depots are now working on cleansing that data, getting the system as accurate as possible. So as we start the phased rollout for those slagging cab vehicles, the data's there, it's ready, it's available, and that should reduce complaints by about 140 a week that we get currently going into the system in terms of missed collections. And then lastly, housing repairs. We identified lots of missed appointments was a category that we were getting again. And working with the commercial teams that manage the contracts for housing repairs contractors, we realised that the penalties were not being enforced. They were built in as part of the contract, but there was no mechanism because there was no data to enforce penalties against missed appointments. So again, working with that contracting team, They're now utilising the data that we provide as part of the customer service and complaints analysis to say, actually, if you miss an appointment, that's not acceptable. This is what you're contracted to do. We start to enforce those penalties. That should provide the incentive for providers not to miss appointments and make sure that if they're giving customers a time that they're going to be there, that they need to. So what's next? We know that we need to improve the pace of response. We know there's still some work to do on quality. We will go back and look at how we're handling inquiries with directorate teams to see if there is a way that we can improve that process. Complaints, equally, we need to do the same. We're aiming for that 90% SLA, and I'm confident that we will absolutely get there. We have a couple of vacancies remaining, which we're still recruiting to, but that's not a big contributing factor to this. The key to this is we have to reduce the volume. The only way we can reduce the volume is to get to the root cause. We are mobilising next week the first multidisciplinary team meeting with councillors, with officers to resolve very specific street level issues that don't just involve waste bins being missed. It includes fly tipping, it includes enforcement, it includes parking, where we're pulling a team of officers together to start to address some of the root cause issues. That is the value of this process. But I absolutely accept that we need to continually feed back to our teams where we don't get it right, but everybody is absolutely working flat out to try and improve this for our customers. So we've come a long way in terms of where we've got to, and we've got through the single system, and we've got the teams in. Really now we need to push for that quality and response time improvement. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. I had a presentation last night on customer services with one or two other, Tristan was there. And I'm going to say what I said there, because this is a public meeting, that wasn't. I accept what you're saying, Wendy, and I've never had a criticism with the central customer services team, and never a criticism for the political will shown by the deputy leader to try and tackle customer services. I mentioned two cases. I've just trawled through my inquiry list. When I don't get a reply within 14 days, I send a reminder, and when I get a response, the response assumes that it's the reminder was the first inquiry time rather than the original. So that needs to be looked at. I think that's the host department trying to cover up their failures, I suspect. But that it would be nice if we could have some mechanism of it's an escalation rather than just a chasing up, because that is a concern. But my real issue is, and I noticed you having this workshop with key players from the departments, and good luck to you, rather you than me. I had a case where there was a whole street in North Edgbaston, well actually it was probably more than one street, where there was a temporary crew to deal with recycling, and they weren't taking the pods out of the recycling bins before tipping the bin into the wagon. So I don't know how many residents lost their pods and what that cost will be to the local authority. But the response I got back was agency staff, and they weren't aware that they had to take the pods out. So, I mean, that's nothing to do with, that's just stupidity, isn't it? Absolute stupidity. Yes. Absolute. And I don't understand how anybody. And then I had a case this week where, again, I think they did it by mistake. They knew they had to take the pod out, but they only one. It wasn't a whole round, so it was less expensive. But when the guy ran out of his house to say, "You haven't left my pod, it's in the back," the guy said, "Take your neighbours." That's what the guy said. He may have been lying, but why would someone make that up? So the point I'm making is, no matter how hard you guys try, no matter how many workshops you have, members of the public aren't going to read our customer services strategy. They're not going to listen to this. They're going to take their satisfaction levels with the council from their direct personal experiences. And some of them aren't very good.
If I can, there's no excuse for that. No excuse for that. Your point's well made. The customer resident experiences are always based on your last interaction, aren't they? We know that when in our lives. The work that Wendy is doing is part of a whole. We talked about the reporting. That reporting is not just about how well we're doing with your casework. It's actually about, we're going to feed that right back in to all the directorates and hold them to account. Visibility, accountability, ownership is the critical test. This is where it links into the work around the performance framework, the tools that we're using, the data that we've got, that we can then really drive the performance and hold people to account. We're only as good as our last interaction. We know at the moment, through self-evidently, from all the feedback that we get from customers, that there is not ownership at ground level of putting citizens first, and that's one of our core values, and is a foundation plank of everything we do, and it has to be everything we do all the time. It is not acceptable where we are today. We've got to fix it. We've just got to do it in a structured way, and it will take a while, but resident experiences are going to be impacted.
What I'd add to that is there's two aspects of that. There's what Peter's just talked about, but there's also actually a wider workforce strategy that we need as a council. So we have 10 to 11,000 staff. That is an awful lot of human beings who are out there doing individual things, interacting with people on a daily basis. There will always be incidences where we have people not necessarily performing as we hope they might. I'm really sorry to hear about those particular examples. They're horrendous. But there's a wider HR question now, which is about how are we inducting people into the organisation when they come in? How are we briefing temporary staff if they're coming in to cover? Because it sounds like some of your examples were. What are the things that we are, what are the expectations we are setting from them from day one when they come in? Are we going back and refreshing that? If you joined your council at 16 and you're, now 60, when was your last training session on this? When were you last refreshed on it? Those are all questions that we need to be unpicking. And I know over in HR, they are looking at this whole sort of staff induction journey, essentially, and training side of things, which is a big part of that.
I think we put an important point on that. Of those employees, 88% of them are also our customers, so residents in the city. Are they happy with the service that they get provided? And that's really the challenge through the customer strategy, is actually, it's not just about you working with the city council, but you are also a citizen in the city. And if you're not happy with the service that's being provided, why we provide it to the people? It's really about just reinforcing those key messages, because you're quite right. We can't fix the whole council through a complaint process. We can aim to try and reduce complaints through improved service delivery, but we can't fix this as a centralised complaints team. The services can't do it in isolation. It's got to be a joint effort, and using the information that we're able to provide, we can really start to get underneath it. And even if we, like the housing application example, that's made a real difference to those 5,000 people whose forms were sat in a tray somewhere over a 4-week period. If we find one of those a week, one example like that a week, that's going to make all the difference to those people that we're helping to resolve those issues on. So it is really important that our employees understand that, yes, they're here because they work here, but actually they've got to be, providing that excellent customer service all the time. And that extends to people that are on the cold face, our carers, our bin crews, our housing teams that are going out into the communities, because at the moment we've got to do a lot of work around that culture piece and embedding that as part of people's inductions, as Councillor Jones and Peter said.
Roger, John.
Thank you, Carl. I mean, I've got a similar one. There's an area at the end of my road actually where there's little 3-storey blocks of flats, and they've been rooms across. It just seems to be an endless series of issues. The latest one last week was that for some reason, wrong size bin had appeared in one of the bins. So this was requested to be changed, and what happened was they took the wrong bin array, and that was it. There's no bin now. So the resident put in the request, so why hasn't the right bin been put back? Oh, okay, well, we will look into this and we will try and get your new bin within 2 weeks. So, I mean, how you can even imagine that you can take away the wrong bin without replacing it there and then with the right bin is just beyond me. I guess it's possibly about one big service from Montague Street or one big service from Redfern, I don't know. And now you're into the sort of joined up council, yeah. But it's the same sort of thing. I specifically wanted to raise a couple of issues. One is that with all these statistics, it's important to bear in mind that I think the biggest individual area where I generate casework falls completely outside of this, which is Kia. And is there some way, I mean, they've got their own system, but is there some way of at least reflecting what's going on with Kia casework? I know some of it comes into this system and then goes on to Kia, depending on how people put it in. But I know we had a conversation, and actually the figures you had for the amount of casework I was doing was less than half the casework I was doing, because of course then you also have casework that's going to outside bodies, which is completely out of this as well. So this is actually a minority of what I'm doing for those two reasons. And that needs reflected, particularly the Kia stuff. I mean, stuff going on to other bodies like Central, well, that's their issue and it's for us to manage. But the Kia stuff is council stuff. On the assisted collections, I do welcome that, but I go back to the point just been saying that level of missed assisted collections, even with the old system, was just simply too high, even accepting there might be a slightly easier way to flag up which houses have them. I mean, there's simply 140 a week out of 4,000. Now, those are the ones that complain. I bet that it's actually the ones that missed assisted collections is slightly higher than that. If people will, if you've got a single elderly person, which is a typical assisted collection type person, they may not be generating that much waste, and they may wait a few weeks before they actually complain about it. So I bet the number of missed assisted collections is higher. The final thing I wanted to say is that at the moment, we're getting a lot of emails back that say this will be dealt with in 2 days. And that's just simply not true. You know that you're going to get, hopefully, something done within 2 weeks. If the system works, and if not, you're going to have to chase it. To get emails back saying this will be looked at and responded to in 2 days, well, it's simply not going to happen. There's something wrong there, and it would be a helpful, at least if you're tracking, well, okay, we're responding to these types of inquiries in X number of days. Well, at least put that number of days on that email, so at least we, that email actually means something relevant. Just rather than just saying that clearly isn't the case. So those are not amendments.
Respond?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think absolutely right. The casework for Kia, we've got a number of complaints teams that are statutory or provided as part of an outsourced team of contractors, and Kia is absolutely one of them. So more than happy we'll pick up conversations with the department lead to see if there is a way that we can look at that transition. I think there are already discussions taking place about through the Investment in the Future paper where some of the activity sits. So we know that we've seen the disaggregation of city operations and city housing, and that's seen emergency planning move across in city operations. So I do believe those conversations are happening. So yeah, we will see if there is a way that we can join up the reporting in the meantime, if nothing else, in terms of making sure that the stats represent those services that we don't currently provide responses to. There are, as well as Kia, there are a number of other statutory complaints teams that pick up and respond. So I will look and see if there is a way that we can capture that information, if nothing else, that we can see what happens there. On assisted collections, I think you're absolutely right. It's the same as anything that we do. Quite often people don't want to call us or complain or through fear of what potentially may happen if they do. but that's why it's important, again, that I think on those assisted collections, it's given us visibility, because a lot of those calls were going directly into the depot managers, or into the depots, or into the site. So we didn't really have a feel for how many. We know that we had lots of activity in that space, but we didn't really know why. So now we do know why. We can start to support with trying to improve that process. And, you know, in many cases, those crews that are out there would have been getting a hard time, but the practicality of traipsing through 4,000, you know, probably 200 bits of paper to try and find it in alphabetical order is just not practical and more time consuming for the crew. So we will do what we can to help support that and reduce that number. The emails, I think we send an auto acknowledgement to say that we, you know, our aspiration is that we want to get back to as many people within that 2-day period, and we are not hitting that yet. We are, you know, there's no excuse for not hitting it. We are seeing excessive numbers coming through, and we genuinely need to get a handle on that, which is what we're trying to do. We are looking at resourcing in teams to see if we can move people around where we've got some peaks. But our main focus at the moment is just to try and stem the flow in terms of the volumes that are coming through. So we need to do both, and we know that we need to do more. But I will have a look and see if there is some further work that we can do in terms of the more practical timescale for getting back to people. Because the official line is 15 days, but what we do know is that some of those things that come in cannot wait 15 days. They need to be acted on more quickly. So it's just how we do that in a sort of bit of an automated process. So yeah, thank you for that.
Good. I'd just add to that. So just important to recognise where these different things land. So lots of what is being described as unacceptable service failure. This system is about finding that service failure and getting in there to address it. It didn't cause the service failure in the first place. That was sitting elsewhere. It's just really important just to focus on where these different things are sitting in the scheme of things. We're trying to get the example you gave about assisted collections. I'm sure that number was higher, and I'm sure there are still some that are getting reported to individual depots. It comes back to officially that number was significantly lower. Officially on our system, we weren't getting those complaints show up because it was sat in individual depot inboxes. Some of it would have been sat in the director's inbox. Some of it would have been sat in field member inquiries email. Officially, the number was very low, so we didn't spend any money to do anything about it, because officially it wasn't showing up as a problem. Officially now it is a problem, so we're able to send somebody in to deal with it. That's the distinction to draw out. I should also caveat this, because I know that the vast majority of our staff are doing a really great job, and working really hard with people that are going out there, and even those are slipping up sometimes and still trying. This is about making their lives easier for them, making it easier for them to do their jobs as well.
That is
that great service that I know the vast majority of them want to be doing.
That is an important point to make.
Yeah.
That we've got some fantastic stuff. Anyway.
Thanks very much, Carl. And I think that's the main thing, that the staff are doing a good job. And us here as councillors, we're here for the residents, really. It doesn't matter what political party you're from, you're here to represent the residents. So it doesn't matter which way you vote, we're here to make sure that they get the services that they want. And so it is important that the council analyses and find out where it's going wrong, where to make mistakes, so that it doesn't make those mistakes again. I think the first definition of madness is to carry on doing the same thing you did before and expecting to get a different outcome. So, I'm pleased that the council trying to analyse what it's doing and how it's going to do it. What I probably have an issue with is the way that it's going about it. If you have the misfortune to run over by a car and you get taken to the hospital, your first triage is a data analyst who's going to work out what's wrong with you, who see where your injuries are, and then tell you to come back in 15 days to analyse the data. You know what it is a medical professional that's going to have a look at you, fix you, hopefully, so you can get back to where you want to be, and then that data will be analysed to find out what happened. Was there a road accident? Where was it? Is that fallen? Does something need to be done about it? And I'm just a bit worried that, we're here for the residents. When residents, for me anyway, I can only talk personally, when residents get involved with me, asking me for something because the system's broken down, for some reason, their service hasn't been supplied to them. And quite often they need a really quick reply. So going back into the service to get a tick on a box sometimes is not going to fix it, because quite often when I go back And I said, well, yeah, because the computer might say that, but of course, that's the problem. I need to speak to a human being who can fix this. And then sort of what I would rather be hoping was that the departments themselves, you know, they would be sort of, they would feed back their failures. You know, we had said that this system's taken on 29 staff, and then they found there was a shortage of staff in housing. I would much prefer these staff to be working in housing personally, sorting out those 5,000 backlog, rather than 29 data analysts suddenly finding out that they can go in and sort that bit out. And also, why isn't housing shouting that, hold on, I've got a problem here, and this is where we need something to do it? Why do we need a data analyst system to look at that to find there's a problem? I think probably if we can solve the problem as to why the departments themselves aren't reporting back these issues and why we're having to spend money on this, I think we would get a long way. You know,
I thought the housing revenue account was ring fenced anyway, so I don't know how you can go in and subsidise. I thought you can't subsidise the HRA, and the HRA can't subsidise the council, but that's a separate issue.
So, I mean, and I think that's it. I think it's 15 days. I mean, the thing that sort of drives me up the wall with this really is that I had a lot of residents contact me through sort of various sort of means. There was about eight streets that had been missed. Some of them were in my ward and some of them weren't, but I just dealt with them because the residents don't want to hear someone say, I'm sorry, it's not my ward. So I dealt with it, I reckon, probably in our area of Sutton Coldfield, probably now North Birmingham, because it's all coming out. I think we're probably a wagon down. I think that's why constantly it just seems you can see the pattern of missed streets. Don't need to be Einstein to work that out. But you know, when people are getting our collection days on Tuesday, so when people are getting back to me late Tuesday, first thing Wednesday morning to say my bins haven't been collected, you know, you really need to speak to the depot. So you don't have to get wagon out today, really, because you know fine well by the time it gets to Thursday, Friday, they're not going to see a collection. And when people are saying this is the second time that it's happened to me, I reported it on the website. So if they don't get a wagon out, it's going to be 3 weeks before they see the collection, you know, and then you're into side waste issues and are they going to take it because it's lying by the side? And then to be told that's going to be 15 days before someone comes back to you. I mean, this is my thing because, you know, data is supposed to be the servant of the council. It's not supposed to be driving what's going on. We're supposed to be having this data and then deciding what to do. And you know, in the commercial world, you know, you get all these printouts and you have your sales meetings or whatever you want to call them. And you look at that, but you're always told that this is the history, you know, life is evolving and things are moving on in front of you. So you've always got to stay front on. You can't just live off, you know, what your printout in your past sale was. And there probably is an element of that here. So I'm really pleased that we're looking at it. The examples that, you know, I've said to everyone, but as you still to use in public forum, so I may as well say, you know, I had one where a resident got in contact with me. The contractor had been working for the council, wasn't a council contractor, was spraying something down where his kids and his dog were playing. He asked him what he was doing. He said he's working for the council, he's got some poison. So he said, is that safe? Yeah, of course it's safe, and use everything. It wasn't. Dog gets home, dog starts being sick, the kids are sick. Next day he's feeling sick, so he gets onto me saying, can you find out for me what's coming back? So I get onto the AD because I'm thinking, I know, we need to find out what it is. I get an answer back to say, I'm sorry, you've got to go through the council complaints line. I'm pretty sure I think I got a 28-day response time, but I could have been wrong on that. Anyway, I kicked up a bit of fuss about it. Another AD picked it up, looked into it, and found out that the contractor had used a pesticide that isn't approved by the council. It's been banned in Germany. It's carcinogenic, right? So I got back to the residents saying, well, actually, this is what went down there. They say that it was fine, that, you know, possibly you might feel a bit sick. It shouldn't kill your dog or anything like that. But if you want to go and get medical attention or go and see a doctor, it might be ideal. And unsurprisingly, you already have. But, you know, and this is the problem with this data stuff. And I can go on. So I'm kind of supportive of it. But I just think it tells wagging the dog here a bit. You know, it's sort of, I've got some other notes, but I think probably that I've probably got the message across here anyway.
Maybe in the future we need to get the service leads here to talk about specific issues, because we have discussed about what we do with that data, and rather than just customer services presenting it, maybe if there are areas of concern, rather than just the deputy lead but the cabinet member with responsibility for that area where there's clear issue.
Yeah, can I just say, I think that's the difficulty here, because also you're becoming almost a fall guy for other bits and bobs, and it's not, I understand you look and do the data, but, you know, for the fleet waste to have to deliver and collect the bins, you know, that's the thing, you know?
Yeah, so we'll have a separate meeting, well, I'll discuss about, and we'll come forward with proposals about how we handle this in the future, rather than just customer services people come, that we have the key players from those underperforming.
Well, that is done partly by the individual scrutiny committees.
Yes.
We talked about this yesterday, actually, didn't we?
Yeah, okay. Well, do you want us to delegate it to them? Is that what you're saying we got, or what? I don't.
They're already looking at it, aren't they? I mean, the housing scrutiny, we were talking about these issues
Okay.
yesterday.
So should we leave? I don't want to have more work for us, but I'm not on any other scrutiny committee, that's the issue, where you guys are. So I don't get that face-to-face contact, but yeah.
So if I may, Chair, that's another bit really. So the complaint system isn't missing your collection. A particular bin crew on a particular day for a particular reason is missing your collection. And if you want to delve into the fine detail as to why, that would be something you need to get that service area info and drill them on. But I just want to clear up a misconception really, which is that this is sort of a separate system sitting on its own, collecting and analysing data when it's not. So the people who are processing these complaints are embedded in the departments the complaints relate to. If we were physically back in the office properly, they would be physically sat alongside them and be able to go across the bank of desks to the manager and ask what's going on here. They'd be physically in the same building, in the same team. At the moment, because we're virtual, they are located virtually within that, but they still take part in the relevant management meetings or whatever. They are in the team. They are not a remote force that is sat somewhere else. So anyone giving you that impression, quite frankly, is passing the buck and trying to make it appear that something else is going on here. Obviously, we do have a central team that then sits above all of that. It does some of the number crunching. If you see here, looks at where we can send people in to improve things. The point, there's no point collecting data unless you're doing something about the data. And that's what we try to draw out in the presentation. The data is there in order to look at issues and send in people to drive the improvements there. When you, the housing example you've cited, I'd much rather people working on fixing the problem, which is why we diverted. Was it, how many people did we divert? 18 people off of processing complaints and doing customer service work at the contact centre. We diverted them to fixing that root cause problem, exactly as you described, in order to get in there and make that difference. So just wanted to clear up that misconception that this is just a remote machine sat somewhere. It is not. They are embedded in the departments. They are side by side, or as much as you can be when you start behind a computer screen. But they are virtually organisationally side by side. They should be resolving these things in areas. If there are particular areas where you're getting the feeling that's not what's happening, if you can let us know, we'll take that forward.
Yeah, sorry, Chair, it's okay. I mean, it's sort of a similar sort of thing. I think it was last month, with COVID time, there's a tendency to be fairly fluid. Sometimes you've just got to go out on site and have a look at something to try and sort it out. So I went out there, we met officers on site, and residents were there as well. So we spoke to them all, and to be fair, brilliant, one of the best things you can do, really, because just none of them got it. From that, something came out of it, emailed the officer directly, one of the officers who was there, who came back to me with an answer. Now, I'm not sure if I CC'd in the complaints line or if they did, but so he replied to me with all the information, absolutely brilliant, first class. 15 days later, I get a reply from the complaints line, exactly the same information. So cut and pasted that he'd sent me was there 15 days later. You can imagine me going, well, what's all that about then? Because whoever cut and pasted that email, and they may as well have done something else. I already had it. The officer had already sent it to me. But it obviously worked through the system and ping-ponged around and come back. And I'm not close enough to know why that was, but it just left me feeling a bit nonsensical about what's coming out here.
Sure. I think we all acknowledge if there's an emergency situation, you bypass the complaint system. And I would suggest that chemical that
Yeah.
it's great, it's such
I
a.
think I was more concerned that I got quite a snotty email back
Yeah.
telling me that, well, not to me, mate.
I
You can
suspect-
imagine it's, you can see it's got me going, you know.
I suspect it was a computer generated. So it's a snotty computer rather than an individual, but, you know.
But let's be
still-
really clear on that point, you know, when it is an emergency, when there is
Yeah.
risk to life and limb, when there is, you know, a clear and present danger or worry, obviously deal with that, in the appropriate way. Don't put it
Yeah.
into something like this.
Narinda.
Thank you very much. I mean, I'm going to try and share some details of things that I think that we try and look at, consider, and maybe comment on. So one on the housing issue. So I know it's all computerized now and people have housing applications, etc. So just something that has recently come to light for transport of abuse who are often in temporary accommodation, often exempt accommodation. So I was supporting a lady who was pregnant with twins when she first came to the accommodation. An application was submitted for her housing, but then while she was there and an application was being assessed, she had her children. So I logged online to update her change of circumstances to say that she's now had children. However, it wouldn't let me say that she's no longer pregnant. So every time I tried to tick that she wasn't pregnant anymore, it said that I couldn't do that because I've already reported that she was pregnant when I did the first application. So I then thought, okay, well, that's fine. I'll just put the change of circumstances, add family members, added the family members. And then I got immediately, as soon as I submitted that, it says she's no longer eligible for housing, when she'd already been told that she's been eligible for housing prior to the children being born. So there's a flaw somewhere in the system there. So I don't know. So obviously I've written back and I said, well, the only thing that's happened is she's had her babies. The rest of the circumstances are exactly the same. So I'm not sure why that's happened, but if that's something that you could look at, because obviously if someone's pregnant, they're not going to stay pregnant forever. They're going to have babies. So they need to be able to change that. And the other thing as well, in terms of like the crews and the refuse collection, so quite often we'll get whole roads that are missed. And in our scrutiny inquiry with homeschool transport, one of the systems we're looking at is a 365 program and implementation of that to track the journeys, etc. Is that something that could be maybe utilised as well in another department, for example, the refuse crews, so that one, it could be utilised by, so for example, if there is an assisted collection, the crews can be told, this is the road, these are the roads that are assisted collection as you're going along. Yeah. I don't know if it's possible, I'm just throwing it out there, but as a possible solution to some of the issues in terms of them trying to remember addresses and alleviating some of the complaints that we're getting. So if we're looking at it in one area of the council, that's something that we look at in refuse crews. One, it could assist them in saying these are the journey routes that you need to be taking, so we know regularly that certain roads aren't missed because the crews have been told this is the road you now go on next. These are the roads which are missed collection or assisted collections, or any extra special messages they can read on there. So I don't know if that's something that can be explored.
I think that's actually what the slab in the cab's all about, actually, because the data, GPS, you should know exactly where you are and where you're going. So, yeah, I think that's what we're already.
Oh, is it so?
365 is actually being used in education and skills separately for route planning.
Yeah.
But the principle of I'm going down the street, this is the street I'm required to go to, and that house is where I need an assisted collection, and it tells me.
Yeah.
It's perfectly reasonable to call a sat nav.
Yeah.
So, yeah, perfectly reasonable.
Is that what we're looking at for?
That's the intent, yeah.
Right, so that's what you're calling a slab?
It's an iPad. It's an iPad. It's an iPad. It's not a real slab.
No, I figured that bit out.
I'm not entirely sure why it has this name, but it's just an iPad.
So I think the really valid points, and absolutely you're asking all the right questions in terms of, well, hang on, if we've got a system here, why aren't we doing it? Why aren't we looking to just use a single system? In an ideal world, that's exactly where we would want to get to. If we could get like a single customer system in the city, I would just be in my absolute element, because then we could we could reduce so many processes and so many handoffs to departments that this bit of information has to go into this system and then they need it something different. But the practicality of that is that we're operating over 1,200 services, all very different, all very diverse, and we can't ever get to a single. I don't want to say we can't ever get, because who knows?
You'll never get to it.
So we'll never get to it. So we won't get to it. But to get to a single system that can do all of the different requirements for each of those functions that have got their own sort of areas of expertise. But it's absolutely the right questions to be asking in terms of, well, we've got a routing system here, can we use it there? The waste collection system, if I just take that point, so that actually has a routing and programming system. It has a system. The challenge is that on the ground, on the day, this is why it has to be joined up. It can't be customer services led, it can't be only operational led. Working collectively with trade union colleagues, with the operators that are on the ground, the best will in the world. A sat nav will do this to you, it's done it to me plenty of times. If you press the button to route something a particular way, you can ask it to take you the fastest route, or you can ask it to avoid motorways, or you can ask it to avoid certain things. What I know from waste collection is that at certain times, so you might have a perfectly planned route that a system generates for you, but the crews on the ground, the reality is at certain times of the day, that might be school collection, school pickups, people going out to work, coming back from work, congestion at certain times. That route might be the most optimal route, but practically the crew can't do it in that order because the crew on the ground know the times of the day that we can't get into certain roads or we can't get into certain access points. So we need to use the intelligence from the crews, and that's where the administrative teams now are working with them on a crew by crew basis. So we'll start with round one, then we'll go to round two to say, okay, this is what the system has generated, that's the most optimal. You tell us the reality of how you do that round, and then we will take that data and we'll upload it so it's accurate. And then we'll test that. So the first slab in the cab, the first vehicle that gets the technology to say, this is how we will do this route. If then that driver goes off, whoever steps in doesn't have to think about, well, what order have I got to do this in? Because they should literally get the technology, press the button, and it will do it in the order that the regular driver would do that, and know that you can do that without missing any connections. The trick then is maintaining it. So if something changes, if there's a difference in routing or programming, or a road closes temporarily, or a school changes the opening times, then the crew know that. So we absolutely can't just do this with technology. We have to work with the staff group, with the crews, with the administrative teams, and they've all got to be singing on the same hymn sheet so that that's maintained, so we don't miss connections. So I think the Snapping Cab's a really exciting rollout. For me, I just can't get it there quick enough. If we can get to the next stage, that let's say we have a vehicle breakdown, we can't get a vehicle, the winter, ice, we can't get down the road. We should know which roads we can't get down. We should know which vehicle broke down and what properties they're accessing. When we know that, we should be able to push that out to everybody who's due to have a collection. So don't wait for them to tell us that they have a collection. Let's notify them and say, your road will be missed today. We're very, very sorry. We've had sickness or a vehicle breakdown or whatever. Actually, leave your bin out, we will do our best to get to you within 24, 48 hours. So that's the aspiration, that's where we need to get to. But at the moment, we have to get the basics right. And at the moment, the crews have got such knowledge in their heads that it's not coming back into the systems. And some of that's due to capacity, willingness, culture plays a part in some cases. So we've got a lot to address in terms of that, but the appetite is absolutely there. And I sit as part of the Joint Service Improvement Board, and Councillor O'Shea, Darren Shell as the lead for that area. It really is a joined up effort to try and do it. So I think that would be really exciting. When we get to that point, we should see a massive reduction in complaints. And then the system for housing, I'm sorry that you've had that experience. We do need to look at the technology, and part of the customer strategy work. When I talk about those 1,200 services, in my head, we've got what we call the sausage machine, and everybody needs to go through it. Every single service needs to go through it. And every service manager should know what their customer experience is. So that point that you raised about, well, I can't process an application because I get to this point and I can't go any further. By doing that review of that whole process from start to finish, we should identify that. And when we have that conversation, we should be saying to ourselves, well, actually, do we need anybody to manually do that? Or actually, can we automate it? Can we digitalise it? And where we can, we will, so that where you need somebody to physically read something that might be more sensitive about, domestic abuse, or we may have other interactions, that resource can then be used to best, deliver that solution. So we will be, to give you some assurance, we will be looking at that as part of the strategy, but it's a 4-year programme, because to go through 1,200 services, and obviously we need to somehow, I don't know how we're going to do this yet, but somehow prioritise where do we start. And the complaints analysis might inform where we start, because where we've got lots of service failure, we might start with those, because actually we could have a bigger impact for our customers. So we are aware of it. I think there is appetite from services to want to improve this. In the main, the services that I speak to, and the crews that I speak to, and the unions that I speak to, they don't want to do a bad job. They've just got a mixed bag of toolkits that they don't quite know how to use properly. Nothing ever works, so you just stop using it. So it was a bit like the introduction of Teams. We had Teams 2 years before we got locked down, but no one was really using it because we weren't forced to use it, because we didn't have to, because we had meetings like this face to face. But now everybody uses it, and so I think there's a little bit of that that's happening. That we almost need the data now to not demonstrate a crisis, but to show the level of service failure, so that we can have the capacity and resource to then plug the gap. To knit that good.
Yeah, can I just quickly?
It's very passive. I've got other people, go on.
I mean, what would be useful is if, when you put an application in, you have an end box that says, is there anything else you need to tell us? If there was a box like that, and you could just simply put on there, I wasn't able to click the not pregnant box.
Yeah.
And I've updated with the details of the babies. Just something simple like that would be useful, because then before that, and rather than having an automated one, which puts you in panic mode, thinking, oh God, she was on the housing register, now she's not. Yeah. So now we have to wait 56 days, unless the officer decides to respond before 56 days. Just something simple like that would be useful, where it does give you an option to add an extra comment.
Yeah, I'll take that away specifically as an action.
Kirby.
Thank you. A lot has been covered already. Wendy, I want to thank you, because you have helped me on situations that I have struggled with, and your colleagues in the department obviously had difficulty with, and I've got to say, I commend you, because you've always answered and reacted, so thank you for that. Well, we're talking today, and there's no question about it, it is about coexisting together and collaboration, you said already, and co-ownership really, because we've got to co-own it across all levels, I suppose. I'm not into detail usually, but I do want to just mention the root cause analysis report that we've been sent, because I'm not sure if I'm meant to get that. That's my first question. If I am or I'm not, I would like to see it, because obviously if you've got it and I'm getting, she's about co-ownership, then why shouldn't I have it, because I'll co-own it as well. Because I'd like to see what's going on in the ward I represent, and I think it's important to have. I just
Who represents Chardin? No.
I'm not sure, but the reports from Chardin, I was just wondering if it's only Chardin again, the reports.
I hope not. Just talking about, I'm just the root cause analysis, and we've had examples today, and I don't want to regurgitate any of my woes, but there's certain things that go on between the waste and the housing, and safer working practices within the waste department. Now, on those sorts of issues, they are complex, and there's no doubt about it, and Ewan said it himself, you've got to go higher, because that's just how it works, and it's a quicker route. I just can't quite get my head around what relationship managers mean with this, because I do use them, and to my knowledge, most people use them. And it is a fast track route. You talk about sat nav situation. It is a fast track route, and I'm of the mind that, well, I'm a pretty swift personality. I like to respond quite quickly, and if there's a quicker route, I'll go it. And I know that doesn't always capture the data. I'm happy to put the data in and let somebody see it, but I also want the swift route. Interestingly, with housing repairs, certainly where I represent. My understanding is with the procurement on that particular contractor provider is they are paid an annual fee for that work. So whether they do 5 repairs there or 3,000 repairs, they are paid an annual fee. And I think the term is price per quantity. Now, that is failing without a doubt, and I know that particular provider in the south that is going to re-tender. I asked because I've seen water recently. So that's going to be re-tendered. It might be the old provider comes back. So there's certainly, when you talk about root cause analysis, it's difficult for members to get all of it unless they make those investigations. And you will obviously, I don't want to do all that work because I'm not paid that salary to do it. So you do that, that's fine, or the service providers at the departments, I want them to do it because I represent residents, as we know. Just going back to the point on the relationship managers, where do they really fall into this? Because the conversation this week from those local people that I speak with on site, and I've done 3 visits this week, they're struggling with the iCase work. So I'd just be interested to know, are there issues with the iCase work? Are they telling the truth? Yes, if they are, I believe they are. They've got issues with it. Is it they've got issues as in capacity, or are there issues with the actual system itself? Because I don't see iCase work, so I don't know. And I just want that tying up of the relationship managers and the responses, and you capturing your data, and us all getting to the root cause analysis. Obviously, we all want it to work, and it's part of the solution, but I just think short term members really should be discussing relationship managers, because that's really how it's done quite swiftly. I know you want to comment.
Yeah, happy to. Yeah, I think there's quite a lot in there. So I think firstly the transparency bit about the report, should you have access, I believe is absolutely everybody should. So eventually what we want is to display our performance against complaint data at the ward level on the web, so the customers can see how we're performing. So absolutely, but we are also mindful of sensitivities, and so some data sets will be locked down in terms of, you know, who can run reports for what. So but we're aware of that. So at ward level, I think it's really helpful to see what's happening and what are the top snapshots. Yeah, absolutely, of what's going on. We didn't create this process with a view to slow down the pace of inquiry or daily resolutions. The conversations that you need to have, absolutely. The relationship managers, really key role. And actually what we do is they work as part of customer services with the operational areas to provide a base level of information. When they're doing their contractor meetings or whatever that may be, they're informed and they've got the information. Nobody's raised, well, let me rephrase that because that's not a true statement. So the iCase work system has always been there, but the functionality was quite restrictive, so we weren't using it to its full potential. We locked stuff down that we didn't need to. We didn't have drop-down menus. So that's why there was a bit of a reluctance, and it was the same system that was used, dare I say these words without people booing me, but the members portal, it's based on that same foundation. And we know that only three councillors out of 101 actually wanted to use it because it was quite clunky and difficult. So we've stripped all of that back. And so we are continually reviewing that with a view that will make it more accessible, easy for people to use, and the data will be pulled down from it, and we'll be using a different toolkit called Power BI to give you the base level of information you need. So it's a bit easier to use and a bit more user friendly. We had 21 technical changes requested since we've gone live with this, a mix of feedback from members and employees and relationship managers that are using the system. And we've processed 19 of those. So as we're being made aware that something's not working or it's difficult or it's clunky, we're going back to the provider and saying, hang on, we need to do this in a different way because it's not working for us. So the more feedback we get in terms of how people are using the system, the better toolkit it will be really. So absolutely, we don't want to lock that relationship with services. I genuinely believe that if we were all located in the same place, the pace of the ability to respond would be much improved, because it's so much easier to just go and talk to somebody an email, chase, Teams, them, pick up the phone. So we almost can't wait for that to happen in terms of
Do you
getting
have a date for that? No.
So,
The date for what, sorry?
So when everybody will be physically where they should be, so they can operate.
Depends on their role, and they can be wherever they need to be, with the role that they perform. So if they're in adult enablement, they need to be with their clients. If they're in waste group, they do their stuff. If you're in a housing office, then you will be there depending on what the requirements are at any one time. We're actually allowing people a lot more flexibility in how they're working.
So people can choose now to come in and work from Woodcock Street or work from Lancaster and sort of book the desks. But I think what we need to do on the back of today's session is probably just follow up with the service leads and say, we need to get to a point where we're back in the room and actually, if it's in the service interest to speed up the pace of inquiry handling, we probably need to get that agreed with each area on an area by area basis.
I think so.
Yeah, buildings are open, people can use them. We need to collaborate, run workshops, do whatever we need to do. That's all fully functioning.
Just to say, I chair the PJCC, as you know, Wendy, and that flexibility is something that the unions keep on about. But I keep saying to them, sometimes the union views and the residents' needs are not compatible. And as councillors, we're always going to choose the residents' needs. So
And that's the message.
Yeah. I mean, I'm quite blunt about it. I'm not.
I'll be very clear with everyone. That's the message that's gone down every single level, that it is actually about you need to be working where you can best deliver the outcomes for citizens. And we're training managers to try and do that because they can't rely on old ways of working, particularly with their multifunctional teams.
Okay, you've been very patient. It's your name.
Well, while I've been sitting here, an email has popped into my inbox at 11:05 this morning, and it begins, "Dear Deirdre, I'm sorry to bother you, but if I try to report something to the council directly, nothing happens." And you could say, well, that's a coincidence that came in this morning, but it's not a coincidence because those sort of emails come in day after day after day. And you see, I bet every councillor sitting around this table gets the same. And while that is happening, it doesn't matter how much you're going on about this, that and the other. We at the sharp end are still getting people that saying, I contact the council and nothing happens. And I had one last week where someone was rather desperate about a tree in a neighbour's garden that they thought might be going to be coming down, and they wanted to know if a TPO could go on it quickly. And I used the planning inquiries line, and I got back a response. You'll get a response in 20 days, which I think is 20 working days, so that's a month. Well, that tree will be down by then. That is pointless. And so with that kind of thing, with the too long a call-in to get too long a response to get a reply, and being told every day by constituents that I've tried telling the council, I can give you my number. They often say, yeah, these are the reference numbers. So you know they've contacted the council, but the problem isn't solved. And it's very, very frustrating from our point of view, because we're on the sharp end.
And just to let you know, there is an important election coming up in May. And councillors, when they are faced with, people contact them, they all want action done pretty damn quick. They want action done pretty damn quick. But in everybody's mind is focused in the months leading into an election. I know all the councillors here work as hard as they can throughout the year, but it's just a case, it's their jobs on the line if they don't respond or get responses quickly. So I think you can expect a lot more tension in the coming months.
I absolutely hear it, and apologies that you've had that experience. You're right, other councillors tell me exactly the same thing. I think part of what we're trying to address as part of the customer strategy is exactly that. It was last refreshed in 2016. We've got over 200 telephone lines in the council. We've got 256 web pages that need to be maintained or updated with probably not correct information on. We've got over 300 back office inboxes. So the challenges with service, where did it go? Which telephone call did it go into? Which service did it get reported to? Which inbox did it go to? We talked earlier about a single case management system, and if we had that, I may as well just pack my bags and really well, because it would solve a lot of the problems. We would have visibility in one place. We're not going to get to it. So it's really important that we make slicker systems, slicker processes, but there has to be an appetite with that human element for people to want to respond and want to get things done more quickly.
But that's not the system, that's the individual departments.
And it's
Yeah.
flight tipping. I can tell you what it is. It's flight tipping.
Yeah.
So presumably they put that through to the depot, but there needs to be some system where they know whether or not it's been done. And if they find it hasn't been done, they can go back to the constituent because they've got their contact details.
Yeah.
And they can say, I've realised this hasn't been done, I'm chasing it for you.
Yeah.
But instead that never happens, and then they come to a council, you see, and say the council's useless.
Well,
And you see, that's the bit that the inquiry bringing it in on this process was exactly intended to do, so that we can see that it's gone out, and then you would have somebody physically chasing it on your behalf. You actually shouldn't have to chase it because it's an important, instruction to a service to get this done. But we see it time and time again. So as much as we've created, a slight delay in getting them into the system and out to the services, what we're able to do is track it back and say, well, how long did it take? Why hasn't it been responded to? Because at least we can see it. And I think, I absolutely hear Councillor Mackey. You are going to have examples where you've got to just pick the phone up, speak to the depot, and go, what the hell is going on? Get this sorted now.
Well, exactly, that's what I've done, because I go to the street cleansing bloke,
Yeah.
and I know he'll reply in the next day or two saying, job's gone.
Got sorted. Yeah. So we need a way of doing
I've
it.
got, just make, I think just a little,
Go on then.
just a little, I think it's sometimes, we're focused on that resolution, our housing one guy sends me a video of some, like, trying to kick down his front door. So, it says it's the guy who's living 2 doors away, get on housing, can't get anywhere, so I went to the complaints line come back to me to say, we haven't got an answer either, but don't worry, we've logged that there's been no answer and it's gone into the system. And I thought, well, that's great for data analysis, but that's no good to this bloke who said his door kicked down, you know what I mean? So obviously I just carried on. And it's these things that get niggly, because we just want delivery, really.
So those guys should be focused on delivery at the front line. Yes, they should be looking at the data, but actually what they should be doing is fixing it. So these examples are really helpful for us in figuring out where that's gone wrong. But I just wanted to you made a really good point, which is when people come to us, they say, I contacted the council and it didn't do anything. At the moment, the council is round about 10,000 individual human beings. We then have, they are working to deliver 200 to 300 different services and things. We do everything, taking a kid into care, to licensing a dog walker, to picking up that bin, to fixing that tree, you name it, we do it. They're busy doing 200 odd different things. Back office behind it is, as Quinty has described, it is all of those different processes, all of those different phone lines, some of which go from an individual's phone rather than a contact centre. At the moment, they're not contacting the council. A lot of the time, they're contacting an individual who works for the council or a department.
I think it's usually the call centre, I have to say. I think it's usually the call centre.
Okay.
Either online or because they run one of those rolling numbers.
Yeah, who then go back to the service, and the service that needs to fix it is still often operating in that very siloed way. We need to get to a culture, we need to get to a place where the whole council, 10,000 of our employees, all of our departments, all of our 200 odd things that we do, all understand that they are part of the same machine, all understand their duty towards the customer and performing to the same standards. We're not there at the moment. We're still in that sort of micro department and micro, often individual mindset. What we need to shift to is where, when they say they contact the council is acting as the council and is responding as the council, is owning it as the council, and in the same way with any other company. That's the shift we need to get to.
And just to support that, there's less than 2% of services that go through customer services. 2%. So of the 1,200 services that are available across the council, there are 25 that have a consistent customer service standard that go through the contact centre. So in context of when we talk about the council, I think it's a really important point, and thank you for just confirming it, that the context of what goes into the contact centre and what goes outside of it, 2% of the total services.
I'm going to suggest that's where the problems are, though, with those ones that go through the contact centre, because they're your bins, all your bins issues and your housing issues. They're the ones, aren't they? The ones where somebody has gone direct to someone probably aren't the ones that flag up.
There's a bit of both, I think. So we also have a huge amount of people calling the contact centre for things that aren't the things that go through the contact centre.
Yeah.
So they will ring so people will understandably ring a number of the council, because that's obviously what you would do. The expectation for the customer is that that number can deal with all the things that we do. In reality, it only deals directly with a tiny number. All those other things that we're not going to say, no, go away. You should have been psychic and realise it was actually that person who works down there that you should have run. But we'll pick that up and pass it on to the department to do it. But that department won't necessarily have the same standards of dealing with it as we would expect. They won't necessarily have the same back office that we would expect, and so on and so forth. And that's very often where things go wrong. So there's a huge job here, and we'll bring to you guys the customer services strategy, which is due to go to Cabinet in December now. Yeah. I really want to bring that to you guys because that starts to delve into that next layer that lots of you have started picking up on, and starts to look at how we resolve that next layer of things.
Same.
Thank you. So I appreciate that with any new system we're trying to implement, that it will face teething issues, and I'm glad to hear that we're learning and taking feedback and making improvements. I also want to say that I appreciate that officers have had a difficult task trying to deliver this during the middle of a pandemic. So what my experience has been, that I found that the sort of response time is varied between departments, and I think many members will have experienced that. It depends on which department complaints or inquiries in relation to. Do we have data on response time by department? And the other point I'd like to say is that where some departments are performing better in terms of response time, customer service delivery, perhaps good practice can be shared, across the departments. And I know we talk about where things are going wrong, but I know Wendy's been sharing some good news stories of where things are getting right, and I think we all want to see more of that. And I thank you for that, Wendy, because I've had some times where the system has worked, and that's good, and I want that to be replicated across the board.
Okay. That was a common learning to respond. Right. That's the first stage of our.
Can I thank them for coming up and actually sort of facing up here today? Because I appreciate it wasn't easy, so thanks for coming along.
I just wanted to, I've raised one, there's three other things I just wanted to raise. That's the planning enforcement reform that's been.
That was all going so well.
Yes, it came up as a result of Councillor Cluna's point. I tried to use it once, and I have to say I gave up. It's the community planning use terms, and they refer to legislation that most lay people will not be familiar with. And I think planning are particularly bad. I'm just going to read you an email I had the last few days, and I can't find, but it said something like, this matter has been decided under delegated powers using so and so and so and so. Should you want to know more about why the refusal was enacted, it doesn't actually say in the email that the application has been refused. So the level of communication is as important as getting a prompt response. And I think, as I say, planning is particularly bad in this regard. And I think looking at that planning enforcement form, I doubt whether they did any focus groups with people who might want to use it, councillors, etc., before they put it together. So I just wonder, I spoke to Emma about this after our meeting on the 24th, where planning enforcement were I won't be ever so gentle, weren't very helpful in terms of their responses.
In denial?
Yeah, maybe. And I just think that we need to look at that. Now, I don't know whether, one of the action points may well be that we refer that to the appropriate scrutiny committee, which is
The economy committee.
the economy committee, saying so you can, because planning comes under your committee, that, have a look at whether the use of language and the forms that planning are using are fit for purpose, I think, because that's something that we've all raised from time to time. The second issue is how we get reassurance from this committee about the host departments picking up on the feedback from customer services. And we haven't had a visit from the new chief exec yet. And I know that everybody tells me that customer services is very much uppermost in her mind, and at the management team meetings, it's a constant feature. I think it would be useful at a forthcoming meeting that we had her come along and talk specifically about, well, she can talk about her view since she's taken over, but with also a focus on customer services, because I think that would be useful.
Yeah. Can I suggest that comes along at the same time as the customer services strategy comes here, which was the offer? That's obviously.
Yeah, sounds good. Okay, now it is now 20 to 12. I was planning to do a 10-mile walk this afternoon, and I need to finish before it gets dark. So over to you, Peter, with digital.
Yes, of course. Do you want to lead? Or
Sorry,
I'll say a quick 2 seconds.
Okay.
Why is this important? 2 reasons. One is inclusion. So we recently published our digital inclusion strategy as a council, which you'll hear more about during this. Digital inclusion is a life changer for all of the obvious reasons. My grandfather turned 90 recently. His 90th birthday, I asked him, what is the technological change that's made the biggest difference in your lifetime? And he said, without a doubt, the internet. It is a myth that it's just all the people are offline. They're not. It is life changing. It is wonderful. So digital inclusion is part of this, but also there's the economic side of it as well, which is the boost of the economy that you can have by having decent modern connectivity is massive. So there are 2 angles to view this from, but I will pass over to Peter, who can talk you through a better technical detail than I can.
Yeah. Just bear in mind the time, Peter.
I don't want to.
Usually,
I'll give you 2 minutes. I think everything is well written in the summary report and the presentation that we've got. And I don't think we should necessarily repeat the digital inclusion stuff. It was actively discussed in Cabinet in September. There's a very detailed report, strategy, action plan, which is now being mobilised. As Bridget said, we're seeing the state of data and technology as it's used across the city as an important enabler for economic development. We have been working actively with the market on the state of full fibre access. I know members have been really concerned about this. There are considerable not spots which can only be resolved by the commercial providers. And we've given you some stats about the performance there. We are taking some further market engagement about whether the council will actively intervene in this area. And what I mean by actively intervening is either putting our own capital money, getting a third party or sort of a new third party to intervene into the market and put more fibre in the ground, which will then be extendable across into residents and businesses, or whether we put our own network in the mix and then use that as a base to grow further fibre coverage. Going government have announced that the West Midlands are going to get a significant investment in gigabit technology, as they call it. Although actually I can't actually find out anybody to actually tell me what that actually is. And that will hopefully improve things. Both Virgin Media and BT are, or Openreach, they say, are investing in Birmingham, but they're choosing their priorities according to their needs and not necessarily our needs. And that's just a fact, unfortunately. However, we have intervened in housing. We have actively worked with Openreach to facilitate access of fibre connectivity into large housing blocks of flats basically, which then residents can, through a third party, access high speed or gigabit or super fast connections, depending on what it is. And the paper gives you a sense of what we're doing around that. We're also engaging with another third party in facilitating their access, and they specialise in very low cost high speed access. And we're currently negotiating with them on some of the fine details about how they're going to do that. And we continue to work across the system. I think the difficulty that the city faces is influencing the big players to focus on areas that give residents particular problems, like the jewellery quarter or the city centre. Ironically, the city centre is very poorly covered with high speed or fibre access. And actually, it's the residential areas on the outer edges that get better position. And there's a map of full fibre coverage in the pack. And that, hopefully that was quick.
Okay. I want to thank you who initially raised this. We, during the initial stages of lockdown, we realised just how important this was. And like you, Bridget, I've got two elderly in-laws who live in South Wales. We've invested in the portal, and that ability to have regular face-to-face visual meetings with them has massively reassured Dee with their daughter, because she's an only daughter and only child, and she can get in touch with them regularly. But for them to be able to, that it's not just it's the quality of life that has improved as a result. So I think, thank you for raising this. You want to come in?
Yeah, because I agree with Peter, probably after previous items, while I find myself obviously swinging behind you there. I think that the problem that we've got on broadband from my amateurs looking at it is that you've got pretty much still the monopoly that is BT. They're the ones that own Openreach. They pretty much have the monopoly. They set what speed you're going to get, and if they, with the new sort of charter that comes out, they then give you a very safe low speed, and as long as that low speed is the one that they offer you, tough, that's all you're going to get. And there is no real sort of competition. You can go between different companies, but they're obviously using the same infrastructure, which is Openreach, which is ultimately owned by BT. And BT themselves have got it all quite cushy. Virgin have a slight disruptor in the market, but they were only formed because a load of cable companies massively expanded. Of course, as they're robust, you don't take the debt with you. So then, of course, Virgin were able to buy up all these companies and make them into one. A third party to come into the market now nationally will be pretty difficult. The government tried to go out for a tender. Was it Siemens, I think, tried to get involved? Sorry.
No, as Coventry have proven, and they had SewerNet. They had their own network and they used it. Hull, Peterborough, Telford, there are lots of smaller cities there who are using new third parties. There are new entrants in the market. A company called City Fibre, they're in Wolverhampton, they're doing a lot of work there. They're not ready to come into Birmingham for whatever commercial reason. But if I go to London, you'd have thought that would be really difficult with the 32 boroughs, but actually they're using the whole of their Transport for London infrastructure, and they have got a new third party entering the market to really improve resident and business experience, obviously So it is actually there. The other thing about our market testing is there are a lot of actually big pension companies who are looking for long-term asset returns, who are looking to invest in this kind of area. And there are a number of organisations. We're trying to close them out. Our challenge as a council is what are we going to put in the pot to actually help them? And do we put our network in and say, well, you know, do your best? Or do we actually put a significant capital investment to sort of oil the wheels on all those knot spots that are all over the city?
Yeah,
that's the challenge. Our scale works against us a little bit because Peterborough's one thing, Birmingham is a significant different thing.
Yeah, sorry, I probably wasn't clear. I'm talking more nationally.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, more nationally than anything else. But because I think that's it. London is Community Fibre, who are known actually for delivering faster speeds than BT, and I think that we do have a part to play in helping out here because there is a gap in the market. There was a company called Energis, I think, which was owned by one of the electrical power companies, because there was a time when it looked that it was feasible that broadband could come through your electrical cabling, which then meant that basically fibre was already in everyone's houses, and their share price went from pence to about £15 a share in no time. And that was back in the days when £15 was a lot of money. But unfortunately, it just came to the end that it wasn't reliable enough, and that didn't come. But it just shows that anyone who can crack it can get there. And I think that if we're waiting for BT to deliver it across the city, the second city after all, you know, we should be able to deliver this for our workforce. We've got a new way of working, and so at the end of the day, we need our workforce to have a reliable thing.
And I have been in dialogue with Openreach on a number of occasions, and obviously the committee has met with them as well. And while they might have been less than detailed about which street they're going to do when, I am convinced they're putting the energy and the money into it, but of course they've been driven by their own commercial priorities. Yeah. And unfortunately that doesn't always align with local businesses and particular streets, as people find. You know, one street's good, one street's bad.
Okay, thank you. We come to the third part of this report, and it's Becky Howard who's going to talk about performance targets. Is it Deputy Leader's going to introduce it again?
Yeah. Have you had slides circulated on this one?
Not on this one.
Couldn't see the seen this. Okay. Are you able to, Emma?
Full assistant.
Yeah, no, I was told this was a verbal update, that's right, so we didn't get any slides, so that's.
A quick email to those present, if that's helpful. Well, I'll talk to them first, and I'll hand over to Becky and then email them to you all. That's probably quicker. So yeah, this was a regular update on performance. It's again, as usual, focusing on how performance works rather than individual performance of areas, which I know individual Scrutiny committees will pick up on. We have had some disruption, as you will be aware, to how performance operates due to the pandemic. A number of our team to be diverted off performance onto other more pressing matters. They are already back now, which is good. We also sadly had to suspend benchmarking during the pandemic, not because we wanted to, but because understandably the organisations that we rely on to give us benchmarking data are also focusing on other things due to the pandemic. So that's the how things have been operating for the last while. So we're back to normal more or less now, with the exception of benchmarking, which is an ongoing disappointment for us. The people we rely on to give us the data still aren't up and running. The performance document that goes to Cabinet has changed its format slightly in its last iteration. It's still the same data being presented, but based on feedback from this committee and others, it's just presented in a slightly different way to make it clearer how things are performing. So we've reinstated the tables that should give you the overall performance. You don't have to just dig through it all to all pros to see that, and organise things around Cabinet portfolio as well, just to make it clear what they relate to, because there's often a lot of, it wasn't entirely clear in the way that was being presented. There's some behind the scenes stuff which I'll hand over to Becky to talk about in terms of how it's working with CLT and so on, because I think that's really important to talk about as well. Yeah, go for it.
If so, thank you, Chair. So, not only are we looking at the way we report into scrutiny committees and cabinet committee, also the officer level of governance around performance is now much more clear than it used to be. So, corporate leadership team, the directors, the chief exec meet on a monthly rhythm, and one of those rhythms each month is performance board. It looks at two distinct areas that meeting focuses on. One is all of the KPIs, the key performance indicators in the delivery plan, which is what we report in by portfolio holder, but it's done by director, because every director, there is really strong accountability now. So all of those within my directorate, regardless of which cabinet member holds it in their portfolio, I am directly held accountable for. And I think that sort of golden thread down is really, really important. So each director will go to that performance board. Obviously, the chief exec chairs it. We go through 3 months' performance, each director's performance collectively. We focus on, as a corporate team, how collectively we can unblock and unblock everyone when we've got concerns. In our one-to-ones with the chief exec, it's all about performance. Now, there's 3 different elements to that performance. So the key performance indicators that you see. The other thing that goes into that cabinet report, and is therefore available for scrutiny, is the deliverables in the delivery plan. So if you cast your minds back to cabinet in November 2020, everything that we're going to deliver by May 2022, and guess what? May 2022 is coming up quite quickly. So not only are we held to account on the KPIs, we're also held to account on the deliverables, every single deliverable in that delivery plan. So again, whilst portfolio holders hold certain responsibilities, directors within their directorates, there is an owner for every single one of those deliverables. So on a monthly basis, they're RAG rated, red, amber, green. Collectively, they're discussed at CLT for unlocking and unblocking, individually in your monthly one-to-one with the chief exec. The third element of that delivery plan, which also forms part of this performance, is the programs, the transformation programs, the big programs of change, be it Oracle 1B, which is the new massive IT system going across the organisation. That's what I'm responsible for. Customer services is another one that's in there. You know, all of those big transformational, early intervention and prevention, all of the inclusive growth, everything like that is again attributed to each director who's collectively held responsible in CLT and individually with the chief exec. So we've now got absolute clear clarity and accountability and ownership for all of the delivery of that delivery plan, which takes us up to May 2022. Now clearly, past May 2022, when there's an election happening, I believe, there'll be a new corporate plan coming out. Okay, so that new corporate plan will have new annual delivery plans attached to it. So the corporate plan sits there and it's a medium-term corporate plan with 3 to 5 to 10-year corporate priorities. We've got to be very, very clear as, you know, cabinet members will hold directors to account for the annual delivery of that. We need to pull it down to that annual delivery and then down again to individual directors being held to account so that the cabinet members can hold to account, the scrutiny can hold the cabinet members to account. So this is, you know, obviously we're in development of the new corporate plan as we move forward in advance of any election. There'll be key issues like housing and, you know, and safeguarding and everything that will be key issues regardless, I would suggest, of which colour is successful. So that's all in train at the moment. So what we've got now is this positional delivery plan, and hopefully I'll explain a bit more about how it's all accountable at officer level. Which should help. I think where we want to go to in terms of onward performance reporting is we'd like to align financial reporting with performance reporting, okay? Because clearly, otherwise you're only looking at one half of the point. There's unlimited cash, you can deliver everything, can't you? Or, you know, so it's really, really important that those two come together. As you know, we do monthly reporting into Scrutiny on finance. I don't think there's any suggestion that we'd want to do monthly reporting on performance because it's actually much more complex to do, even if you do rolling forecasts. So, you know, that's all happening at the same time to deliver this, you know, more real-time performance management, but actually also rolling forecasts. So the example I always use is one of Peter's on council tax. The fact that we reported in the first quarter of something like 28.28% collected against the final target, 96, 97%, something like that, the year-end target. It means nothing to anybody. What we really want to know is, are we on track by the end of the year to collect that percentage of council tax? So we're going to be doing rolling forecasts, just as we do in the financial reporting. You know, what's the forecast year-end overspend or underspend? How are we going to balance it? That's what we're really interested in. So there'll be a change in stance in the way that we collect that data as well.
If I can add, Chair, and I know we can often perhaps sound like we're obsessed with data, but the reason we're obsessed with it is because it is about shining a light transparently on our performance.
Sure. It's just you and Wendy we think are obsessed.
Yeah.
But Peter, you should be obsessed with data, that's your job, I just want to make sure it balances.
So we talked earlier about the ward data for members, which is important. But actually, all of that transparency is going to operate at every DMC, it's going to operate at every level. If we then open it up, the plan is then to start providing more open data in more accessible ways through our website for residents and anybody else to see. Shine a light on it, it will improve. And at the moment, I would say that it's probably a bit buried, nobody can find it. So the intent is to put, and I know this sounds like a bunch of tech, but actually by making it much more visible, easy for people to drill down, easy for people to consume it, easy for people to call to account, which is the most important bit, then see improvements in service. And I know complaints is only a small part of that story, but shining a light on that performance is going to improve things. It's just going to take time. But it's an example of how that performance can happen.
Well, it's come a million miles from when we had the initial presentation. It was online, it was several months ago. And there were internal, we got confused between internal performance targets and outward-facing performance targets that matter to local people. It didn't, matter about how quickly you could perform within an individual department. It's how, it was the impact on the residents. So you've sorted all that out, you've streamlined it, you've probably separated out from internal targets that you hold individual managers to account from key performance indicators from which we are judged publicly. And I think that was the key issue, I think, for the committee when we had that initial presentation. So thank you. Any comment? I did have a conversation, just going back to customer services and linking it with the KPIs. I did have a discussion with the leader, and I think you were involved as well, Bridget, about the executive business reports to full council, including elements of both customer services and key performance indicators, so that all councils have an opportunity to discuss this key issue in public at the premier forum of the City Council, as well as driving down more forensically in individual scrutiny committees. So I think that is something that we need to officially agree as a committee, that we would like to see that in future executive business reports, probably starting in the new financial year, to give you time to trial some different options for reporting, because if it was Peter and Wendy, we'd probably have 1,000 pages. Now, I'm only joking, Peter. Now, we'd probably have 10 pages, whereas, we need to trial some reports to see what members want, because it is designed for members.
We could do 1 page, but it would be annual.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean, there is data in the council, undoubtedly, that the council doesn't know it has, because in ward meetings, we've always asked for data to be drilled down. We tell them that data is not available, and then someone walked up to one of our ward meetings with a handout and just gave us all this drilled down data on what the ward was doing. And it told us how, it even told me, because you normally get to see how affluent your or not your ward is against other ones, but this one actually told me where my ward featured in levels of deprivation, which has actually spun my ward into a completely, because it's not very affluent, but so I deprived either. So, and then it broke down how many bin collections I have. It just gave me all this information that the council told it that we didn't, that it wasn't possible.
Yeah.
And then at next full council, we said, well, why can't we have that for every ward rather than just Rugby ward? The answer they came back and sorry, we're not able to supply that information. And that's why I was sort of cracking the joke. It's just Rugby and Shard End that helps.
We're supposed to have an annual ward plan. That is always useful background information. I remember when I represented Labourwood, one of the key statistics that came out of the census that we put in the ward plan was what language to households speak in their own household. And it was something like 25% of the Labourwood population spoke a language other than English in the household. So it wasn't the first language, it's the one that they preferred to use, which had a profound impact upon me as a ward councillor. I knew it was high, but a quarter of the population, and that sort of information is critical if we are going to represent our wards to the best of our ability. We need that information. So.
It comes back to that phrase, the council. So
yeah.
Again, where these systems exist, that the knowledge of their existence isn't always understood by all different aspects, all different players in the council who might interact with, and all the people who might benefit from it. And again, it comes back to that need to have just that central corporate project and understanding of what do we have as a council, and making sure that all of our staff, all of our officers, all of our councillors collectively have access to that and know about it. It's another example where we're weak on that one whole council approach to things, and know what the other 9,999 right hands are doing, and that's again the nut and crack.
Can I thank you all for, you can see we've gone over 2 hours on this one issue, so it illustrates, I think, the standard of scrutiny that we, as a committee, and the importance we place on these key issues. So thank you all very much. And I forgot to congratulate Becky Hallard on being appointed Director of Council Management. Is that your new title?
Yeah, it was interim director, but I didn't.
I know, that's why I say, so,
It's council management.
I think
you've been an interim for far too long, Becky.
2 years.
And we are delighted that you're on side permanently. So that's, and congratulations. Okay, let's try and canter through these last issues. The work programme. We do need another meeting to discuss the draft exempt accommodation report and the recommendations. And we are suggesting
the 1st of November at 2 o'clock, Monday, the 1st at 2 o'clock.
That's
been informal online.
It will be online, so I hope that people will, and you will put it a week in advance so that you'll have time to fully digest it and to come up with. We haven't shared the recommendations with the executive.
No, because I need to go. No. So what I'll do is I'll share an initial draft with officers and cabinet members, and an official, the formal 8-day rule, formal comment period will be after you read your draft report.
What day of the week is it?
That's a
Monday.
Monday.
Just before council.
Yeah. We all have our group meetings that evening, so we should be all, around. So that's really important, and at least an hour, possibly more, because it's such a critical report. And so yes. Anything else on work programme? I mentioned the planning enforcement that, Sam's gonna look at.
Well, we've got some of the, things up, including inviting the chief executive of customer services, so we'll schedule that in. And
Probably in the new year.
yeah, so, I think March or before. So I think, I don't know if there's anything particular you want to come back on broadband issues, or whether we just keep
No, just as things develop, if you could do an email rather than come to.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. Request to call in, are there any, call-ins?
Well, I'll just give you one just before you finish that.
Other urgent business, the only other urgent business I've got, this is, Emma's last committee. How many years have you been with the authority, Emma? Too long, hasn't it?
Since 2003.
Okay.
I know, too long.
Yeah, so I've worked with Emma over 2 periods, probably 3 years in the scrutiny process, and you couldn't wish for a better, more supportive officer who seems to anticipate what, as a chair, you need to know and want to ask about. So she's always fully prepared for any meetings that we have. So I'll just, on behalf of the committee, and I don't want to get too tearful or too, you're not retiring, you're going into to work in Cornwall. I mean, what a great place to move to. So anyway, congratulations on behalf of everybody. I know that people pay tribute to you last meeting, and I'm sure they'll want to say a few words again today, but thank you on behalf of everybody in the scrutiny process in all those years that you've been with us. It's been a pleasure working with you, and I wish you every success in your new venture.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just obviously speaking on behalf and probably my colleagues as well, just to say thank you for everything you've done, and I think it's a tough act to pull off, to be absolutely down the middle, fair and firm at the same time. And that is the thing, is that a number of times we're doing a call in, when you bring up and you say, actually, can you give me some clarification on that? I want to do that. And no one ever queries a decision that you make. And I think that's what shows you how fair you are. So thank you very much for everything that you're doing.
And thank you to all of you. I mean, I've really enjoyed my time here in Birmingham, and I've loved working with every one of you. You've made it a really enjoyable time here, and I will miss you. So I will pop back up to see you.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Authority to act?
Great.
Okay, thank you very much.